For a man who fell in battle, the suffering ended. But for the woman he left behind, the true nightmare was just beginning. This topic explores a single, horrific reality. What Vikings did to the wives of defeated warriors was worse than death. Let us dispense with the fairy tales, burn the sagas, melt down the horned helmets of cheap costume shops, and gag the tenured professors who speak of cultural exchange. The Viking Age, that celebrated epic of masculine bravado and seafaring adventure, was built upon a foundation of calculated, systematic sexual terrorism. And its primary weapon was not the longship or the broadaxe, but the womb of a conquered woman. Forget the heroic warrior's death. Forget the glorious entry into Valhalla. The true horror of a Viking raid was reserved not for the man who fell with a sword in his hand, but for the wife he left behind. Her fate was a masterpiece of psychological warfare, a fate so meticulously cruel, it makes a clean death on the battlefield look like a divine mercy. The modern world, drunk on its sanitized sagas and thrilling television dramas, imagines the Viking as a noble savage, a raider with a reluctant code of honor. This is a pathetic lie, a comforting bedtime story we tell ourselves to mask the grinning skull beneath the face of history. The truth is this: the appropriation of a defeated enemy's wife was not a crime of passion committed in the red mist of battle. It was cold, strategic policy. It was the ultimate expression of dominance, a way to salt the very earth of a man's lineage and ensure his name was not just ended, but grotesquely overwritten. When a Viking warlord dragged the screaming wife of a slain Anglo-Saxon thane or Frankish lord from her burning hall, he was not merely taking a prize. He was seizing a factory for producing heirs. He was claiming a living trophy designed to perpetually broadcast his victory and her husband's utter, eternal emasculation. Her body became the parchment upon which he would write the final, insulting chapter of his rival's history. Death is a release. What these women endured was a life sentence in a prison of flesh and memory, forced to serve and bear children for the very monster who slaughtered their world. In the cold-blooded marketplace of Viking conquest, women were the most valuable form of currency. They were more than just spoils of war. They were walking, breathing instruments of geopolitical and social demolition. When a Viking crew sacked a settlement, the process of sorting the human loot was as pragmatic and soulless as a butcher dividing a carcass. Old women and the infirm were often cut down where they stood, deemed useless. Young boys might be taken as slaves, but the high-status women, the wives, daughters, and sisters of the defeated chieftains and kings, were a separate category of prize altogether. They were the strategic assets. These women were meticulously evaluated. Their health, their age, their lineage, all were factors in a grim calculus of value. The wife of a powerful lord was a political tool. By taking her as a concubine or a wife in a sham ceremony, the victorious Viking leader performed a symbolic act of castration on his dead foe. He wasn't just sleeping with a beautiful woman. He was usurping his enemy's bed, his home, his land, and his social standing. Every night he spent with her was a reaffirmation of his power and his enemy's pathetic failure. She was the living ghost of her husband's inadequacy, a constant public reminder that he had not been strong enough to protect his most intimate possession. This process was designed to annihilate her identity. Her name was often forgotten or replaced. Her language was suppressed. Her religion was mocked and discarded. She was stripped of her fine clothes, her jewelry, her servants, and every vestige of her former life. She ceased to be a lady, a wife, or a mother to her previous children. She became simply a thing, a frilla, a concubine, a status defined entirely by her sexual utility to her new master. The psychological torment of this transformation is unimaginable. To go from being the respected matriarch of a powerful family to a piece of human chattel, her worth reduced to the pliability of her body and the fertility of her womb, was a descent into a living hell from which there was no escape. She was no longer a person, but a function, a vessel for her conqueror's ambition. The most insidious and diabolical aspect of this strategy lay in the weaponization of pregnancy. The rape of a conquered woman was not merely an act of brutal lust. It was the implantation of a Trojan horse. The Viking womb raiders understood a fundamental truth of power. To truly conquer a people, you must hijack their future, and the future is born from the womb. Forcing the wife of a defeated king to bear the child of her husband's killer was the ultimate act of dynastic terrorism. It was a biological and psychological masterstroke. This child, born of violence and despair, represented the final, irrevocable victory. It was the conqueror's blood flowing in the veins of the conquered. This child might one day inherit the very lands that belonged to its mother's murdered husband, a walking, breathing symbol of the old line's utter extermination. The enemy's legacy was not just ended. It was contaminated, polluted, and rewritten with the victor's DNA. Imagine the unending horror for the woman. For 9 months, she is forced to carry the seed of her destroyer within her own body, a constant, physical reminder of her violation and her people's defeat. When the child is born, she may be forced to look upon a face that mirrors the man who butchered her family. This child is both hers and not hers, a monstrous paradox, a symbol of her complete subjugation. It is a cuckoo in the nest of her heritage, a biological time bomb set to erase everything she once was. Her sacred role as a mother, the bearer of her people's future, is perverted into the most profane of tasks, breeding the next generation of her oppressors. This was not collateral damage. This was the entire point. The battlefield was no longer a muddy field in Francia or Northumbria. The final, decisive battle was fought in the dark, silent confines of a captive woman's womb. And it was a battle she was destined to lose, over and over again, for the rest of her miserable life. If you seek proof of this systemic cruelty, do not look to the primary sources for an open confession. History, as always, is a pack of lies told by the murderers. The Icelandic sagas, those celebrated works of medieval literature, are not honest chronicles. They are the carefully constructed propaganda of a predatory culture. They are the Viking Age's version of a press release, designed to recast gangsters and thugs as epic heroes and to whitewash their most unforgivable crimes. Read the sagas with a cynical eye, and you will see the conspiracy. When a Viking hero like Egil Skallagrimsson or Olaf Tryggvason slaughters a rival, the text often notes with casual indifference that he took his wife. The phrase is delivered with the same emotional weight as he took his sword or he took his treasure. The woman is an object, an acquisition, her humanity and her trauma completely erased from the narrative. The sagas are obsessed with honor, lineage, and reputation, but only for the Norsemen. The inner lives of the Slavic, Irish, and Saxon women they enslaved and forcibly impregnated are a gaping, silent void. This silence is not an accident. It is an admission of guilt. It is the literary equivalent of burying a body in the backyard. Modern academia and pop culture are complicit in this fraud. They fawn over the concept of the shield maiden, elevating a likely rare or even mythical figure into a symbol of proto-feminist empowerment. This is a convenient and profitable distraction. For every one semi-legendary Lagertha, there were thousands of unnamed, real women whose lives were systematically dismantled. The obsessive focus on the strong Viking woman serves to obscure the horrific reality endured by the countless non-Viking women who were treated as little more than breeding stock. The sagas are a monument to the victors, and their foundation is built on the silent screams of the women they erased. They are not history. They are an alibi. To comprehend the sheer soul-crushing reality of this practice, we must exhume one of its victims from the sanitized pages of the sagas. Consider the case of Melkorka, as recorded in the Laxdæla saga. The story, as told by the Icelanders, is a quaint tale of an exotic slave. The truth, when viewed without the Norse filter of self-aggrandizement, is a portrait of unspeakable horror. Melkorka was not born a slave. She was a princess, the daughter of an Irish king named Murkjartan. She was captured in a Viking raid around the year 970. Imagine the scene: the terror of the attack, the smell of smoke and blood, the sight of her father and his warriors being hacked to pieces. This teenage girl, a princess raised in comfort and with the expectation of a royal marriage, is chained, brutalized, and thrown into the filth-ridden hold of a longship. She is stripped of her name, her family, and her dignity before being shipped to Norway to be sold like livestock. She is purchased by a chieftain named Hoskuld Dalla Kolson. He buys her not for her skills or her wit, but for her beauty. He makes her his concubine, and for years she endures the profound trauma of her situation by refusing to speak. This is not a quaint character quirk. It is the desperate act of a soul in agony. Her silence the only shield she has left against a world that has destroyed her. She is a prisoner of war, a sex slave, and her silence is a rebellion. She eventually bears Hoskuld a son, a boy named Olaf the Peacock. This is presented in the saga as a success story, the slave woman who produced a great chieftain. But what of Melkorka? She was forced to bear and raise the child of her captor, a son who would grow up to be a lord in the very culture that had butchered her people and annihilated her life. She was a queen, reduced to a silent broodmare. Her story is the saga's most damning, unintentional confession. It admits she was a king's daughter. It admits she was captured and enslaved. It admits she was used for breeding. The saga frames this as a minor detail in the grand story of its male heroes. But for Melkorka, and for the thousands like her, this was the story. It was a story not of adventure, but of a fate worse than any swift, clean death on the Irish coast. It was the story of a queen forced to live out her days as a monument to her own people's destruction. The Vikings believed they had perfected the art of conquest. They thought that by seeding their bloodline into the fields of their enemies, they were ensuring their own immortality. They were wrong. This strategy of sexual conquest was not a foundation for a lasting empire, but a slow-acting poison that rotted their society from the inside out. They built their house on a bedrock of rape and subjugation, and it was doomed to collapse under the weight of its own depravity. The children born of these forced unions were a source of perpetual instability. They were the sons of conquerors, but also the sons of captives. Their loyalties were forever suspect. Their claims to inheritance constantly challenged by the legitimate sons of Norse wives. This created generations of internecine conflict, a bloody pageant of half-brothers murdering each other for land and titles. The very tool they used to destroy their enemy's lineage turned back on them, corrupting their own with endless feuds and internal bloodshed. The Vikings' obsession with pure bloodlines and honorable heritage became a grotesque joke as their halls filled with the offspring of their brutal conquests. Ultimately, this is the true legacy of the Viking Age. It is not one of exploration, trade, or daring adventure. It is a timeless lesson in the sophisticated cruelty of man. It demonstrates that the greatest acts of violence are often not the swift and bloody ones, but the slow, grinding, generational ones. They did not just kill men. They systematically unmade their families, erased their histories, and hijacked their futures. The wives of the defeated were not merely victims. They were the battleground, the prize, and the ultimate symbol of a victory so total it aimed to rewrite biology itself. Our modern fascination with the Viking aesthetic is a morbid carnival, a celebration of the murderer while ignoring the shallow graves of his victims. The real story of the Vikings is not written in runes on stone, but in the silent, epigenetic trauma passed down through the blood of the women they broke. They taught the world a dark lesson. That true power isn't just about killing your enemy, but about forcing his wife to give birth to his replacement.